Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the second lecture in this year's Sagan National Colloquium. I'm Matt Volrath, a professor in the Ohio Wesleyan Business Administration program, and I'll be your host for tonight's event. This year's Sagan series is exploring the intersection of business and the liberal arts, and tonight, Dr. Ted Steinberg will be helping us consider that theme through the lens of environmental history. So Dr. Steinberg has worked as a US historian for 32 years and is currently a professor of history at Case Western Reserve University. Steinberg's award-winning publications have focused on the intersection of environmental, social, and legal history. And in addition to his 6 books, Steinberg has written for the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Natural History, Orion, the Chronicle of Higher Education, and The Guardian. Tonight, Dr. Steinberg will help us consider the links between business and America's past and present physical landscape, which relates to several books that he's written, including his Pulitzer Prize nominated book, Down to Earth, Nature's Role in American History. As he's talking, please feel free to post questions and comments to the chat, and we'll do our best to address all of those in the Q&A that we have at the conclusion of his talk. So again, thank you everyone for being here. Dr. Steinberg, thank you so much for making the time for us, and I'm pleased to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Matt, for inviting me and for the generous words. Good evening to you all. Matt has asked me to speak about the relationship between business and the American landscape, and that's a very broad topic. So I've got to figure out a way, and I have, I believe, to make it something that's more easy to digest. So my way into this topic this evening is to talk about something that might strike you at first as a bit odd. I'm going to focus on what I call the perfect lawn. What I mean by that is the weed-free, super green, closely cropped monoculture that you often see, especially in this neck of North America. That's the landscape part of the equation. And the business part of the equation will focus on a company that I believe you're probably pretty familiar with, given your location. The Scott's Miracle-Gro company, which is located, I believe, about 15 miles west of your university. You know, it's a funny thing about the lawn. It's something that people tend to take for granted, and yet it's often the most consequential interaction that Americans, or at least suburbanites, have with the landscape. So I want to just start by telling you a little bit about how I got interested in something so seemingly inconsequential. So let me, without messing this up, share my screen here with you, and hope that this works okay. I think so. Okay. The lawn's been a part of my life since the age of 2. When I was a lot more than I am now. That's 1964, 65. A couple of years before that, my parents moved from Kings Highway in Brooklyn. We were living in a basement apartment. People these days would call it a slum. Out to Long Island, or as it's often called these days, Long Island, and in particular the town of Merrick. My father, he liked to play golf on the weekends, and the other thing that he did, of course, was to take care of the lawn, mowing, fertilizing, and watering it into a thick carpet of perfection. I was supposed to be satisfied with this little plastic lawnmower that someone got me. Eventually, my father got either too busy or too tired with all the mowing, so he hired a neighborhood kid, Jimmy, to do the mowing. And Jimmy almost actually lost his life on our lawn when the ground collapsed beneath him one day. It was one of the most frightening moments in my early life. There was an old abandoned septic system that my parents didn't know about in the front yard. The ground, he literally almost fell into the bloody thing. And I remember going out there and thinking, oh my God. It was shortly thereafter that, that Jimmy quit. And I eventually got to fire up the fluorescent green lawn boy and tool around outside mowing the lawn, just like my father and Jimmy had before me. It's amazing that I still have all 10 fingers and toes, because back in the at that time, there were no dead man controls on lawnmowers, meaning that when you took your hand off your hands off the handle of the lawnmower, the blade underneath still spins. Today, as you probably know, lawnmowers have to be made with such a safety device in place. So every week I hauled out the lawn boy, and every week, at least during the spring, I headed over to the doctor for injections to treat my allergy to grass pollen. So I needed pretty much an entire wad of tissues to get through the entire lawn. It always struck me at the time as odd, given how fanatical that my father was about the lawn, that we didn't own our own spreader for dispensing lawn chemicals like fertilizer and pesticides. Not just odd, but vaguely un-American, considering that we had to borrow the spreader from our immigrant neighbor who had fled Nazi Germany for manicured Merrick. But spreader or not, my father could never have been accused of having low lawn standards. Excuse me a second, my phone is going off for some reason here, and I thought it was set off. Sorry about that. Anyway, as I was saying, sorry about that. My father, apart from not having a spreader, did in fact have very high lawn standards. He'd make me roll up the hose. He gave me a pair of hand shears to cut around the lampposts and other things that fences and so forth got in the way. Once a season, we used to have to haul out this hand edger, which was a long handled medieval looking device. That this was before you could do this with gas powered and electric edgers. And we would I would hack away basically at the clumps of grass that grew over between the lawn and onto the sidewalk. I think it's fair to say that Descartes would have loved our lawn. It was the single most important engagement I had as a kid growing up with the natural world. It was really the only landscape I ever really got to know in any intimate kind of way. And while I recognized it as an endless chore, I also took great pride in my ability to mow the straight lines that you see now often when you look at a baseball diamond, or at least a professional baseball diamond. This went on pretty much until 1979, when I went off to college, and thus began what I call my inter-lawn years. For 17 years, I rented apartments, and I steered clear of turf maintenance entirely. Until, that is, I moved here where I'm speaking to you from tonight, which is Shaker Heights, Ohio, in the middle of the 1990s. I was pretty much sad at that point to write off the perfect lawn as yet another example of Long Island zaniness. It's a very odd place, Long Island, which is probably why a lot of the greatest comedians in the United States hail from that part of North America. Billy Crystal is from there, Jerry Seinfeld, just a couple towns over from where I grew up. In any case, we moved here, my wife and I did, a young child at the time, to Shaker Heights. I have to tell you, when I got here, I was shocked. The turf culture in this part of Ohio made the tidy lawns of my Long Island past look like a bunch of beat up old cow pastures. The lawns don't just look like putting greens, they literally are putting greens, right down to the creeping bent grass that people have planted and rolled in their front yard. Some of these homes, you'd swear you were looking at Augusta National. Really remarkable. So we move in here, and it was a little bit intimidating. And I being a historian and also being an environmentalist, I bought a hand push mower and a copy of, I'm embarrassed to say, Jerry Baker's Lawn Book. Baker is an ex-cop who has zero, if he's still alive, no horticultural training at all. And he has variously recommended things like dumping beer and peeing on your lawn. Somehow, despite all this, he's been managed to be anointed America's master gardener. A couple of years of this obviously didn't go that well. I decided with my wife that maybe we should just hire somebody to do the lawn. We hired a company, I can't really make this up, called Genesis Landscaping. The Christian gardeners did a very nice job on the lawn, especially considering what they had to work with. And when the bill arrived, the secretary even cited from the good book, chapter and verse, Genesis 1:11, which I interpreted as, let the earth put forth vegetation so that we can make a living mowing it every week. So thanks to the crew at Genesis, I now had time to think about the lawn. And while listening to the blare of blowers and weed whackers one summer day, I began to wonder, why are Americans so obsessed with lawns? What's driving people to water, to mow, to fertilize, to sacrifice their precious evenings, their weekends, in the quest to enter the kingdom of lawn glory? Why, in short, the fixation with green? Oops. Okay, so an answer, not the answer, to that question, at least my answer to it, is contained in a book I wrote. It will be 15 years this spring, called American Green. And I'm just going to tell you what I learned, or some of what I learned writing this book. So the first thing, if you're going to write about the perfect lawn, is to look at what other people have said, obviously, about this issue. And again, by a perfect lawn, I am not just talking about grass. I'm talking about I'm talking about grass and an aesthetic that privileges closely cropped, super green monoculture, essentially. So the main theory, as far as I could tell, about perfect lawns to this point in time was that I guess I would call it the evolutionary theory. And here the idea is really pretty simple. We have perfect lawns, these people said, because human evolution happened on the savanna in Africa. Ergo, human beings are somehow, if you will, hardwired for lawns. Well, there are a couple that I see, at least two problems with this theory. First of all, a lot of the evidence that's come out in the last 30 years or so suggests that human evolution took place not in grassy environments, but actually in wooded habitats. And the second problem is that if you've ever been to Africa or even seen a picture of the African savanna, you will notice that it's neither green nor short. So I wasn't particularly impressed with this idea. It seemed to me that the field was pretty wide open for a book about this matter. And the first thing that you want to do, at least as I see it, as a historian, is to figure out the specific time period in which whatever it is you're talking about, in this case, the perfect lawn, the specific time period in which it developed. So as it turns out, you can go way back in American history and find that people like Washington and Jefferson, of course, had lawns. So while the lawn goes way back in American history, um, the perfect lawn, at least, is something that's unique to the post-World War II period. Only in the post-World War II period is the idea of perfect turf. Again, weed-free, super green, ultra-trim monoculture. Only then does it rise to dominance. Only in the period since 1945 does the lawn evolve into the multi-billion-dollar industry that it is today. Only during this period, since the Second World War, does the number of golf courses eventually reach some 16,000 courses. This is some of the most intensively managed grass in the entire world. A single golf course in Tampa, Florida, that I was looking into at one point was using, just in a single day, 178,000 gallons of water, which is equivalent to about, if you think of an Olympic-size swimming pool, which is a very large pool, it's about a third of the water in that pool. Only in the post-war period do suburban households and lawn care companies apply more herbicide per acre on lawns than farmers use to grow crops for food. Only during this period, since 45, do people refueling lawnmowers and other garden equipment spill some 17 million gallons of gasoline, which calculates out to more than the petroleum that was leaked during the infamous 1989 Exxon Valdez disaster. And only in the post-war period were tens of thousands, at one point, 75,000 Americans a year injured using lawnmowers, sticking their hands, fingers, and so forth, some obviously killed simply by cutting the grass. So the question then becomes, for me, now that I've identified when the perfect lawn came into being, was what happened during the post-war period to give rise to the perfect lawn? Well, the answer is, as you won't be surprised, is a bit complicated, but I'm going to kind of make it simple for you. The first thing you have to understand something about, if you want to understand the emergence of perfection in lawn care, is you have to understand something about the post-war economic context. This is very important, not just for the lawns, with respect to perfect lawns, but understanding this period in American history and the economic history of the post-war period is important because so much of what happened during this period structures our lives today. So let's back up. World War II lifted the United States out of the Depression. The wartime economy generated staggering economic growth and it elevated corporate profits. But once the war was beginning to wind down, policymakers began to wonder, what would the peacetime economy be like? And of course, they feared the Great Depression. And one of the major questions they had, given the enormous expansion in productive capacity that happened during the Second World War as the United States mobilized for warfare, was, given all this potential for output, would there be a market for US products? In other words, there needed to be sufficient demand for whatever the products were going to be that these factories were going to pump out. And it was very clear at that time, 44, 45, that, for example, the European market would never, was simply too small at the time to absorb all this capacity. And there was really no market across the world that could in the 1940s. Now, at this juncture, the government could have decided not to opt for continued economic growth, but to simply redistribute the massive amount of existing wealth that had come into existence as a result of the history leading up to 1944-45, either through, and take that wealth and redistribute it to people, make things more equal, either through tax policies or through some other ways. But instead, as you've probably figured out, policymakers in the United States and economists decided that growing the economic pie was what should be the focus of the US government and of the economic order more generally. In other words, make gross national product, or as it's called today, gross domestic product, just make that pie grow bigger and bigger and bigger. And by the way, it's only during the Second World War that the concept of the gross national product is named. During the Depression, people were already talking about, economists, national income. So the point is that in the period as the war was winding down, is that the government decided that the path to economic growth, to getting a bigger pie so that everyone could have a larger slice of that pie, the path to growth was going to be through private consumer spending. And this was essentially, this idea codified in law in the United States. The Employment Act of 1946 said that the government was required to actually spend enough to achieve, and this is a quote from the legislation, maximum employment, production, and purchasing power. In other words, the idea was for the government to focus its policy initiatives and its spending priorities in order to cultivate mass consumption, which is, of course, so much a part of our lives to this very day. Limitless growth, economic growth, they thought, underwritten, I might add, by rampant resource use, especially petroleum, was going to be the path to continued economic success and US world dominance. The US was, in 1945, the strongest economy, most advanced economy in the world, and of course, the most advanced military power in the world in 1945. The only one, by the way, with military bases strung out all across the world. So more specifically, how is the government going to achieve all this? Well, one way, as you probably know, is through home ownership and suburban development. That was going to be there was a housing crisis that had emerged during the Great Depression, World War II, and the US government responded to that in a particular kind of way by offering people mortgage guarantees, and veterans, like through the VA, were given home loans through the GI Bill of 1944. The government, in other words, chose not to build housing at its own expense, but made a choice to strengthen and reinforce private market solutions to the housing problem by underwriting it through essentially a subsidy, a government subsidy, these mortgage guarantees and inexpensive loans. And this policy, in terms of growing the economic pie, was very, very successful. Housing starts, for example, which were in 1944, about 140,000. Within 2 years, housing starts in the United States were at 1 million. 4 years later, in 1950, there were 2 million housing starts in the United States. Just phenomenal growth in the course of a mere 6 years. And then housing starts stabilized. They stabilized at about 1.3 million for the next several years. So suburban development was also underwritten by federal money to establish the interstate highway system in 1956, which was to that point the largest single public works project in US history. And this furthered suburbanization in the United States as Americans spread out, including my parents, moving from cities out to the suburbs. It's a very familiar story. And of course, all these homeowners and this is where the private consumer spending part of the US policy after the war comes into place. All these homes and home buyers, they had all this room now. What were they going to do with it? Well, famously, of course, they were buying automobiles to fill up the two-car garages and all kinds of other things, stuffing these homes with all kinds of consumer items, including, I should add, lawnmowers. And this is actually, I didn't point this out, but another theory about the perfect lawn is that it's all about technology. So one of the items you'd find in a post-war garage was something called the rotary lawnmower. Before the 30s, the only kinds of mowers in existence to that point were called reel mowers, which kind of like the mower that you see here on the cover of my book here. You can attach an engine to it. These are very clumsy items to cut a lawn with. They do a very nice job. They're still used today on golf courses, and my neighbors' landscapers use them all the time. It takes a long time to mow a lawn with a rotary mower. With a reel mower, like a powered one of those things. They're very heavy. So in the 30s, the rotary mower was developed. This is much cheaper to produce than reel mowers. They were being built in the 30s by companies like Toro and Jacobson, but it was, of course, the Great Depression. It wasn't until after the Second World War and this fluorescence of suburban development that rotary mowers became were purchased in massive numbers as suburbanization developed. I'm not particularly impressed by the idea that it was just the fact that the rotary mower was developed that explains the perfect lawn. It was a precondition, sure, to the spread of perfection in lawn care, but then you have to wonder, like, well, why? Why are people buying rotary mowers? All right, so let's take a look. Now that we've got a sense of the larger picture at this post-war world from the ground up, and let's consider a place I bet you probably know called Levittown. It's in just about every American history textbook I know. Levittown was just a few miles from where I grew up in New York on Long Island, and the standard story told in U.S. history textbooks is that the Levitt brothers pioneered in the mass production of housing between 1947 and 51. They took what were potato fields out on Long Island and converted them into tract housing, like you see here. 17,000 new homes were developed in a mere 4 years, between 47 and 1951 at Levittown. What you won't see in the typical history textbook treatment of the Levittown is any discussion of the fact that every single one of these homes had a lawn around it. And it makes a certain amount of sense when you think about it. I mean, grass is an invasive species. It's good for healing a scarred landscape. So when the bulldozers trailed off down the road, they needed some way to heal that landscape, and grass was an easy way to do that. One of the Levitt brothers, the patriarch, as it turns out, in the Levitt family, was an avid gardener. His name was Abe Levitt. They called him the vice president of grass seed. And the Levitts in general saw the lawn as a form of what they called neighborhood stabilization, and actually had covenants written into the deeds at Levittown that required the homeowners there to mow the lawn once a week. Now, if you take a look at that image, and I don't know how well you can see it, but that is not a perfect lawn. It's a pretty crummy lawn, actually. And that wasn't uncommon. My guess is that this is a picture from pretty early on in Levittown history, probably before, the early 50s for sure. It turns out that the Levitts, Abe Levitt in particular, they were not boosters of perfection in lawn care. They wanted you to mow it, keep it neat, but it was fine as far as Abe Levitt was concerned. If you had clover in your lawn, no problem. I mean, you probably have seen clover. You have crabgrass in your lawn. A little plantain isn't going to harm anyone. Crabgrass, none of these things at the time really, they're considered now weeds, but back then it was another story. If it was green, it was okay, just keep it neat. All this would, of course, change. And the company that would play a key role in this story was the Scots Company, based, as I indicated earlier, down near where you all are. The company started out after the Civil War in the hardware business, and then began in the early part of the 20th century selling grass seed to golf clubs. And there was a boom in suburban development, nowhere near as extensive as what happened in the post-war period. But during the period before the Depression, the economy was, in fact, doing well, and suburbanization was taking place. And the Scots Company tried to capitalize on that by, for example, creating a new product that I bet you know about called Turf Builder. That was developed, I think, in 1927, 28 or so. It sounds very manly, Turf Builder. And the idea behind Turf Builder was simply to get people to buy a chemical input from this company in place of the horse shit that people were throwing down around the house, which was, of course, not easy to handle and pretty smelly. In 1928, the Scots Company started giving away a free newsletter because, as it turns out, having a lawn is not something that comes naturally to people. They called the newsletter, they called it lawn care. They did not call it, note, grass care. And that was because the lawn, which dates back to the British aristocracy, who were the only ones that could afford all the people before lawnmowers to mow the bloody thing. The lawn was something much more grandiose than just simply an expanse of grass. It was an image, the lawn was, and a dream that was greater, you might say, than the sum of its parts. Grass was mundane, a lawn was the portal, you might say, to upward mobility. In addition, this Scots Company, very ingenious company, they published a whole bunch of newsletters. In other words, they realized that what was good for lawns in New York wasn't good for lawns in Chicago. So they tailored these newsletters to the local and regional environments, and of course selling people on their products in the process. Now, as I said a few moments ago, one of the key problems facing American business in the post-war period was, now that manufacturers had figured out how to produce all this stuff, how are you going to get people to buy it? We may have the perfect product, but what we need in business was saying to itself was the perfect consumer. And underconsumption or lack of demand remained a problem. So, and this had been a problem for some time. For example, in the 1920s, the concept, I'm sure you've heard of it, of planned obsolescence was developed famously by Alfred Sloan of GM, who instituted the annual model change so that people would see, for example, their neighbor driving a model automobile later than the one that they bought, and become interested in trade up and buy a new vehicle sooner. Especially in the latter part of the 1950s, when the economy began to slow down and the post-war boom seemed to be losing some steam, a designer at Ford said, "We design a 57 Ford to make a man unhappy," long about 1958. Well, I bring this up because in my view, the perfect lawn was the on-the-ground equivalent of planned obsolescence. And you have to understand a little about ecology here. So it turns out a lot of the really nice grass species are what are called cool season species that evolved in Northern Europe. And growing these species of grass in North America is an uphill ecological battle, except if you happen to live, for example, in Newfoundland, where there's a little town called Lawn. But otherwise, it's hard to grow grass, or a perfect lawn at least, in the United States and much of North America. That's bad news for the consumer, but it's presented a golden business opportunity for the Scott's company, which of course did what it could to exploit this ecological fact for financial gain. Again, the Scott's company, I admire their ingenuity, and it's interesting to look at how they did this. So I'm going to turn to that now and show you that they ingeniously marketed and advertised perfection in lawn care by tapping into four, if I could call them, social trends during the post-war era. One were social anxieties, two, trends in family life, the history of color is a third trend, and architectural trends. So let me just deal with them in order. Remember, the Scott's company was not interested in selling people things for maintaining grass. They were interested in cultivating a different kind of sensibility, this idea that people should cultivate lawns because it would somehow help them move upward with the Joneses, as it were. And because of this, the Scott's company thought it was a good idea in advertising to prey on people's anxieties about how other people perceive them. So this is a Scott's ad, and you can see these people looking at this beautiful carpet of green. Your lawn's the first thing they see. Encouraging people to have unreasonably high expectations, of course, help the company sell more chemical inputs, which is the name of the game in the lawn chemical industry. And this is still, of course, an issue today. And during the Q&A, if you want, I can tell you about some of my own experiences, including this past summer with this issue. The legacy dies very hard. So social anxieties. The company, Scott's that is, and others, also tapped into another dominant theme in post-war life, this idea of unproblematic family togetherness, which was buoyed by Cold War fears of nuclear annihilation. And the idea being that, it's hard to capture this today for people, but the Cold War was a scary time. I mean, I frankly think the world still is a very scary place with all these nuclear weapons. But that said, people, it's been argued, retreated into the family as a way to generate some measure of security in a world that seemed out of control. Well, again, Scott's very ingenious. In 1957, they renamed their grass seed. It used to be called Special grass seed, but in 1957, they named it Family grass seed. And that brings me to the third trend that the Scott's company tapped, which is color. People find this sort of weird, but as I like to tell everybody who asks what it means to be a historian is, well, everything's got a history, including color. You can see this very cleverly designed, that's a box actually, and note the bright colors, the signature orange and greens, which the Scott's company still uses to a large extent today on its products. Color took on immense importance in the post-war period. Yellow slacks, blue jello, brightly colored consumer products of every kind, automobiles, of course, refrigerators. They became, in effect, status symbols, a means demonstrating that the consumer in question was, a forward-looking person who had forsaken, if you will, the black and white world of urban life, like the one my parents and I experienced in Brooklyn, for the ultra-modern kaleidoscope of suburbia with its methyl green lawns. So that brings me to the fourth and final trend that the Scott's Company leveraged, and that had to do with trends in architecture, which also turns out favored perfection and lawn care. There was going on in the post-war period, you see the building of a lot of tract housing, and especially with the development of sliding glass doors, you see that the boundary between indoor and outdoor space is becoming blurred. This was often called, sold to people, these kinds of homes, as an easy living lifestyle where you could move very almost seamlessly between the inside of your home and the outside of your home. And as this blurring of the boundary between inside and out took place, lawns came more and more to be seen and understood by people as kind of outdoor living rooms. And like the post-war living room, the ideal living room was supposed to be neat. And what that meant outside was picking up after you mow the lawn, taking those clippings and putting them out by the curb so that you don't leave unsightly clumps of grass clippings all over the lawn. And I'll explain how that in a moment, how that worked into cleaning up the grass clippings and putting them out the lawn, how that helped play a role in the Scott's Company's business plan. Okay, so back to Scott's again. Scott's vision for the yard was designed to advance the corporation's interest, which it was, of course, legally bound to do, at least since the case of Dodge v. Ford, 1916. And it did this, of course, by selling more chemicals, but at a cost to regional ecology, what economists call an externality, which is a euphemism for you throw the costs of something onto other people to somehow bear. So the business model of the Scott's Company was organized then around overtreatment. Let me give you a few examples. The perfect turf aesthetic, just in general, led to increased chemical use. So, for example, that nice green color in the Scott's ads that you saw, it was not possible without a lot of water and also a lot of fertilizer. In agriculture, fertilizer is used to increase yields. On lawns, fertilizer is used in order to enhance the color of the lawn. So you can very quickly see, if you're trying to have a beautiful green lawn like that, how you might want to follow the Scott's, 5, 6, now 4-step program of putting down a lot of chemical inputs, a lot of fertilizer on the lawn. And unfortunately, what we know is that when people do this, they're not doing it according to the directions on the package. And they're spreading a lot of fertilizer on sidewalks. Of course, that then gets, rain takes it into the watershed more generally, and it winds up causing those harmful algae blooms that you see in lakes that eventually lead to the death of those bodies of water. The ads for Scott's also showed closely cropped lawns. Well, I mean, people saw that and they started to lower the height of their lawnmower from 3 inches to 2 inches, 1 inch, even less. And when you lower the height of your lawnmower like that to achieve perfection in lawn care, you increase evaporation. And when you increase evaporation, you have to water more. And when you water more, you leach nutrients from the soil. And guess what? You have to go back to the store to buy more Scott's Turf Builder. The outdoor living room concept I mentioned a moment ago. You pick up the clippings and you put them out on the curb, but if you just leave them in place, you would, in fact, get yourself a free fertilizer treatment. But if you pick them up and dispose of them, again, it's back to the store for more Scott's product. What were some of those one of the more innovative products you would see on the shelf, certainly beginning by the late 40s, was called weed and feed, which is probably the worst thing that ever happened to the front yard and backyard, for that matter. What's this all about? Well, as I mentioned, back in the day, before the 50s, clover was a very common species in lawns. Abe Levitt had no problem with it, and Scott's had no problem with clover, and in fact, used to sell a product called Clovex so that you could sow it in your yard. Well, the advantage to clover in a lawn is that it self-fertilizes. In other words, it captures nitrogen from the air, adds it to the soil. Well, eventually, long story short, we don't have time to get into all this. The Scott's Company and others turned species like clover into weeds, and then sold people products like weed and feed to now make up for the fact that clover was not in the yard anymore. But of course, the downside of that is now every time you're fertilizing, you are putting down toxic chemicals. In this case, for example, 2,4-D, which is persuasively linked to cancer, reproductive harm, and neurological impairment. Scott's began selling this product, Bonus, a weed and feed product, in 1947, do two jobs at once. Crowed the Scott's ad. I said it was a time saver. But the only bonus, of course, was to the Scott's Company's bottom line. The Scott's Company, in effect, locked homeowners into an escalating chemical battle that, because of climatic conditions and soil conditions in the United States, that the Mr. Joneses of the world simply could not win. There's nothing wrong with a lawn. A dense stand of vegetation around the yard's a good idea. It's the perfect lawn, predicated on a business model centered on overtreatment. That's the problem. So, like the Scott's Company says, good lawns don't just happen. They are made, and I agree. And they can also be unmade. And I think that's what we're seeing now happening as the perfect lawn has entered into a much more vulnerable period in its history. Part of this has to do with the environmental context, the increasing environmental cost to the world of global warming, water problems. Green consumerism has also cast skepticism on the perfect lawn. As it really makes sense in people's minds to go to Whole Foods in the morning and buy organic kale, and then come back in the afternoon and dump Turf Builder with +2 weed control in your yard. And then even worse, have your kid or your dog track it into the house where, by the way, 2,4-D has been found in people's refrigerators where it should not be. Increased health consciousness is also an issue. Beyond pesticides, reports that 16 of the 30 most common lawn pesticides are probable or possible carcinogens. Trends across the world are not helping. 25% of the active ingredients in pesticides used in the US are actually banned in the European Union, which I find incredible. It's difficult to address pesticide use in the United States because there are these laws on the books in 41 states called preemption laws that forbid local municipalities from passing laws on pesticide use. These preemption laws were put there by lobbyists for the chemical uh, ag chemical industry. And as a result, to the extent that reform is happening in the US, it's focused not on pesticides so much, but on fertilizer reform. 11 states now actually ban phosphorus fertilizer on lawns in urban areas. So I want to just wrap up now with a couple words about lawns in the time of COVID. This is interesting. Last spring, Scott's Miracle-Gro predicted that with people staying home during the pandemic, this would be good for business. And we're going to see if they're right about that. I suspect they are. With all the death and dislocation going on around us, it's very sad. Life seems more out of control, more of a mess than ever, which, by the way, might explain the initial impulse to stock up on toilet paper, which is, of course, good for cleaning up a mess. Something similar is going on with the perfect lawn. If you can't control whether you're going to contract a horrible disease or whether you'll even be working next week, you can at least put the yard in order. In truth, though, the choice to have a perfect lawn with all of its ecological and public health impacts is a bit like the decision not to wear a face mask to prevent the spread of disease. Both are seemingly individual decisions about risk that can end up putting other living organisms on the line. So let me stop there. And if you'd like, I'm going to stop the screen share. If there's questions, I'm more than happy to answer them, or comments, or anything you like.
Dr. Steinberg, thank you so much. That was a really interesting talk. And like Dr. Steinberg said, if anyone in the audience has questions or comments, please share those in the chat. While we're waiting to see if any of those come through, a question to get our conversation going for you. You mentioned externalities, and I wondered, do you think that the way companies think about externalities is changing? You hinted at we're in an era where consumers are a little more environmentally conscious. Do you think the way that companies weigh the negative consequences of their actions is different than it has been in decades past, or are we still in the same place?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, the short of it is I don't know for sure since I've not studied it, but my sense is that they're they're commodifying it, right? I mean, so like what we're seeing now. I mean, look, what I know best is lawns, right? So what what's happened, right? I mean, yeah, okay. So we have eutrophication, groundwater pollution from using too much fertilizer, people getting cancer from 2,4-D or what have you, those sorts of things. So how do businesses deal with that? Well, I mean, True Green ChemLawn changes its name. Okay, it's now not ChemLawn. It used to be called just ChemLawn. Now it's just True Green. And now you've got organic, Nature's Gardener or whatever. You've got, companies. You can still overtreat, even with, with the company that says organic lawn care. I mean, they could. I mean, you have to know what, you actually have to know something to have a lawn. So, I'm not sure really whether it's the case that companies are changing their approach to externalities so much as using it as a possible business opportunity.
Yeah, looks like
I see these. Do you want me to read these? And
go ahead and take them and read them out.
Okay, this is from Alan Arnold, who I met yesterday. Professor Arnold's question is this: I was wondering if the changing idea of American regionalism, I wonder if changing ideas of American regionalism are helping end the reign of the perfect lawn, like xeriscaping in the Southeast or rain gardens, or is standardization too powerful for that? Yeah, okay. So I didn't really talk too much about regional differences. I do think that those are important. I do deal with them in the books. There is a move and has been now for decades toward and it's generally among people that really know something about gardening toward native plant species or xeriscaping is landscapes that don't use a lot of water and are appropriate in arid environments. And this is in fact, she is correct, that regional developments have put a dent in perfection in lawn care. There's absolutely no question about that. And that's a trend that's been going on for some time. And maybe that's maybe that's how things, are how in the end the perfect lawn is overturned. I don't think standardization is in its own right is powerful enough to dominate us 100% of the time and forever into the future. I do think it's possible for us to take control of our ecological destiny, and people are. Which I think is her point. This next question is from Catherine Burns, who liked to talk. We talked about lawns in my Intro to Environment and Sustainability class, okay? I heard of alternatives to lawns with being made of moss or rocks. Do you think this is a better alternative than rebar? Yes, I mean, I have moss in my in my yard. Moss is actually pretty nice. Now, if the moss is on the rock, I mean, it's something that you could slip on and you could hurt yourself. So you don't necessarily want that. But moss it's actually quite beautiful, and in my view at least. So I do think I guess I see this question as is there reason are there alternatives? Of course there are alternatives. One thing you could do, and moss, rocks, or whatever, is just take your foot off the gas and not have a perfect lawn, right? And you can have what I call a low maintenance lawn, which is what I have. I mean, you can do a couple of fertilizer treatments without pesticides. You can mow high so that you don't scout the lawn and increase evaporation, and you could be satisfied and not water. I mean, and the lawn won't die. It'll become dormant and brown, yes, but it'll come back unless it's just a horrible drought that lasts a very, very long period of time. And you can get used to brown and a little less perfection, and you'll enjoy not having 2,4-D in your refrigerator, which is not a good thing.
One more question for you.
Sure.
You talked about how marketing kind of helped create this conception of the perfect lawn. Do you think that marketing has a role to play in changing the way Americans think about lawns, or has that ship sailed?
Well, I mean, I'm not, again, a marketing expert, but I really I think if change is going to come, my reading of the historical record is it generally comes from the bottom up. If I had to put money on how the perfect lawn is going to, if it were to disappear, and I think it will eventually, nothing's forever. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. Even capitalism will disappear. It's not been around that long. Most of human history, we didn't have it, right? So the same with the perfect lawn. I think the change is going to come from the bottom up. I don't think the marketing is going to play a big role here in terms of change. We have a question here from Carolyn Gross. I taught in Marysville in the 90s and would pass Scott's and would annually see a field that was having its soil dug up, carried away, and dumped somewhere. Then new soil was brought in to get ready to try another lawn product again. Okay, yeah, well, they probably, I've not actually been to the Scott's headquarters. They're not that happy with me, to be frank. So they probably don't want to see me. So I don't know what's going down at Scott's, but it wouldn't surprise me at all. They are, you know, they're you know, again, these are not evil people. I mean, I think I'm sure you got that point here. It's a system here. I mean, corporations have a legal obligation to their shareholders. Capitalism is a system where people need to make money to survive. They're essentially systemic imperatives that cause people to behave the way they do. Yes, there are sometimes evil people in the world who do bad things and so forth, but I don't think, as a rule, they're to be found at a company like Scott's. The people there are just doing their job. So I don't know if it's meant to imply this comment that they're doing something evil here. Maybe they are. I don't know. I don't know why they would be digging the soil up. Maybe you know, they're bringing in fresh soil for some reason. You know, there's not actually a question in there, so I think it's more of a comment, but it does make me wonder why they're doing that.
Well, Dr. Steinberg, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for
No problem.
talking with us about this tonight. I really enjoyed the talk, and I'm sure everyone else did too. Before everyone goes, I just want to mention our next talk in the series happens on Thursday at noon. We'll be talking with Dr. Alex Edmonds of the London Business School, and he'll be talking about his recent book, Grow the Pie, which is all about companies trying to balance purpose and profit, and can that be done? So we hope you'll join us for that talk as well. Thanks everyone for being here, and have a great night.
Take care. Thank you.